Good morning, colleagues. Very happy to see you. So many people being interested in the topic today. I would like to welcome you to the webinar on addressing training needs of education personnel for inclusive education. And in particular, we focus today on the education trade unions addressing the whole school approach for inclusive education. And I would like to inform you that this webinar is the first one in this series, and there will be two more. I will tell you more a little bit about it later on. But before we start, I would like to just highlight a few housekeeping rules. First of all, the webinar is being provided in 3 different languages, in English, French, and Russian. You can see the interpretation button on the bottom of your screen. Of your Zoom screen, and you can choose the language that you would like to listen to. Second of all, this webinar is being recorded so that we can use it as an educational material later on, and we will publish it for the open access on the ETUCE YouTube channel. Therefore, I ask you for 2 things. One is to keep your microphones muted during the webinar, unless I call up to you to speak. And second of all, if you have questions or remarks, I also ask you to keep them short, as we have only 2 hours today. And otherwise, I hope you will enjoy and you will get a lot of practical and very useful information from today's webinar. My name is Ekaterina Efimenko. I work with the equality topics at the European Trade Union Committee for Education, and I will be moderating the meeting today. So this webinar, as I said, is the first one in the series, and it is being implemented in the framework of the project on education trade unions addressing the inclusive schools and embracing diversity in education. Just shortly about the project, it developed as a continuation of ETUCE work on equality and inclusion in education. There's a lot of different initiatives and projects that have been done. And what we were trying to do in this project is to unite different strains and topics and different bases for discrimination, to discuss them all together under the big topic of inclusive schools and how to make sure that every teacher and every student can realize their potential. Next slide, please. So the project objective is to build the capacity of education trade unions to prepare their affiliates to address the diversity in the classroom and in the society, and to support them in implementing inclusive learning environments that would enable every student and teacher to achieve their full potential. What is in particular important here is that we are looking for not only disseminating successful good practices from different countries, which you will see today also in the framework of the webinar, but also to have a policy recommendations and to have a policy outcomes, such as, for example, a concrete and practical strategy for implementing ETUCE action plan on equality, diversity, and inclusion. And the whole idea is to ensure that teachers and trainers, academics, and other education personnel are adequately supported in working with the diverse classrooms and implementing inclusive education. So these webinars actually have this goal of ensuring that trade unions, but also their affiliates and overall education personnel are adequately supporting, and we're addressing different training needs that were highlighted throughout the project. Next slide, please. So, so far in this project, we already launched a research report, which was based not only on the desk research and analyzing what are the different specificities of inclusive education systems in different national contexts, but also we had an online survey among ETUCE members, and we collected a big variety of good practices on different topics. And you can find this research report also with the very specific fact sheets, focusing on, for example, on training needs or focusing on key elements of inclusive education. You can find that already on the ETUCE website. There are links provided there. Another practical part of the project, which will be published a little bit later and to which these webinars also contribute, is a catalog of good practices on building and maintaining sustainable inclusive environments. It will be also shown in the ETUCE, integrated into the database, online database of good practices for better user approach and to be able to search for different practices. We also had a seminar in January, and now we're implementing these 3 interactive training webinars. The whole project will be concluded, culminated in the closing conference on the 4th and 5th October 2021, where we will also discuss the practical strategy for implementing ETUCE action plan. Next slide, please. So another project activity that is running along the ones that I mentioned is a series of European and national action days to raise awareness about the professional needs of teachers, academics, and other education personnel when it comes to addressing diversity in the classroom and the society. ETUCE is preparing communication packages and also highlighting the trade unions' actions, testimonies from teachers. You can find examples of it on my next slide. The variety of different visuals and materials that we have prepared there. So there are 2 more days left, which are 17th of May for the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, etc. And the other one will be the actual World Teachers Day on the 4th of October, 2021. Next slide, please. So this was the short overview of the project. And as I said, at this webinar, we will particularly focus on the whole school approach for inclusive education. So without further ado, I will move to our European expert, Hanna Siarova, from Public Policy and Management Institute. It's a European research institute, and Hanna herself has been working for many, many years on such topics as education, children's rights, social inclusion, and gender equality in the European region and in Central Asia. She has also led the research projects commissioned by European Commission, European Parliament, Eurofound, UNESCO, IGE, and national ministers. And unfortunately, Hanna is not able to be with us today here. However, she recorded her presentation, so you colleagues can listen to it. And after that, we will also, with the project researcher, the next presentation, we will also make sure to respond if you have any questions on this presentation. So I will kindly ask my IT colleagues to start the video. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to have a chance to contribute to this ETUCE webinar and reflect upon the key components of whole school approach and what it means for the advancement of inclusive education. In my intervention today, I will speak about European perspective or understanding of the concept of the whole school approach and the key elements it entails from the practical point of view, as well as I will try to briefly reflect on the main conditions that need to be in place in order for the whole school approach to be successfully embedded into school organization and practice. I will base my intervention on various research and policy studies in the area of school innovation and inclusive education conducted by PPMI Research Institute, to which I'm affiliated with. But I will also refer to some analytical work produced by NEST, which is a network on social dimension in education and training, which PPMI coordinates, and also serious network on migrant education, under which we are preparing annual inclusion monitoring reports, such as Serious Watch. We all know that inclusive education policies should be embedded in an overall inclusive, learner-centered vision of education in which high-quality education is a reality. for all and is accessible for all. And in such a vision, schools have a crucial role to play to ensure that all learners reach their full potential for growth, irrespective of individual and family-related factors, socioeconomic factors, and their life experiences. And in such a vision, schools should be safe, welcoming, caring learning environments and spaces, striving for learners' engagement in which children and young people can grow and develop as individuals and as members of the community. Because of this multifaceted nature of children's development, schools are not the only place to nurture it. And of course, different stakeholders and services inside and outside the school need to collaborate and align their efforts. However, schools is a logical site where such an alignment could start. And this calls for the whole school approach. A whole school approach is in a way an ecological way of viewing a school. The school is seen as a multidimensional and interactive system that can learn and change, and becomes a sort of open learning hub, which provides support to its neighborhood, but also receives support from the neighborhood and the community. We know that in the whole school approach, all members of the school community feel responsible and play an active role in children's development and ensuring their well-being, both of children, but also of other members of the school community. And also, whole school approach implies a cross-sectoral approach and a stronger cooperation with a wider range of stakeholders and the community at large to deal with the issues which schools sometimes do not or simply cannot have necessary expertise to tackle. In the context of early school living policies and ensuring well-being of every learner, the European Commission usually refers to 5 key conditions and thematic elements that need to be considered when designing the whole school approach. First of all, it's of course the school governance, which would relate to different elements of school autonomy and distributed leadership, monitoring and evaluation practices. Second is a learner support, starting from engaging pedagogical approaches and curricula, diverse extracurricular activities, early warning systems, psychological support. Third element is the teacher support, which is different capacity building activities for teachers to be able to embrace different aspects of diversity, peer learning networks. But we also need to remember about the trustful and cooperative relationships with parents and extended families, and recognize their role as co-educators and as a resource of support. And of course, the strategy of cooperating with other stakeholders needs to be in place. Within the context of inclusive education, I would like to maybe emphasize and stop a little bit more on the following components, which is inclusive school leadership and inclusive school organization and environment, school curricular and participatory learning approaches, family engagement, and school community partnerships. The evidence indicates that of course, school leadership plays an important role in establishing a positive school climate that promotes respect for diversity, and school leadership is also important in adapting the school environment that meets the needs of the changing diverse population of the school. And promoting the diversity leadership in school implies the development of a shared leadership culture at school, introducing multicultural dimensions into schooling process, including curricula, pedagogy, school climate, and the development of democratic values and empathy, confronting prejudice, which is embedded into the behavior of the whole school community. However, we also see from different studies that to date there are very few opportunities for professional development on diversity and intercultural education for school leaders. But there are some good examples that come out from various mappings. For instance, the network on schools without racism, where school leaders collaborate closely and get support from the so-called advanced practitioners for equality, who work directly, yes, with teachers and school leaders to promote those effective learning strategies, embracing diversity, and also establish a comprehensive equality and diversity monitoring framework. But inclusive education happens not only in the classroom. Social interaction beyond the schools or the classroom walls is important.
Dear colleagues, we stopped just for a second to announce that we're sorry for the quality of the slides, but you have received them in your emails. So to be able to follow, you can also open them from your emails and follow the PowerPoint presentation with the speaker. Thank you.
For children's development, and also is a key part of learning, which also happens in schools, but informally. And therefore, the school environment needs to be welcoming. And in this respect, the school staff are always the key mediators and custodians of this inclusive vision and values that can create this welcoming environment for students and for the overall school community. And there are many ways on how school environment can be made more inclusive. Like we know about examples of various cultural celebrations or initiatives displaying values and languages of schools on the walls. But such interventions are also sometimes criticized by researchers when it is just about the visual attribute of the school infrastructure and not so much underpinned by values and behavior of the whole school community. But here I would like also to bring one example of the Irish school, which is an example of a school where this positive longer-term vision on languages and cultural diversity of their students has profoundly impacted the overall plurilingualism repertoire of all students, and also improved the school achievements and the cohesion within the entire school community. So the school operates on the two basic principles. The first essential ingredient proposed by the school is to begin by acknowledging the richness of the linguistic repertoires that students bring with them when they arrive at school. And at the policy level of the school, this acknowledgement translates into officially welcoming all the languages, but also confirming the role and responsibility of parents and families related to the maintenance and development of the home languages. And the encouragement of parents, of course, goes hand in hand with the development of plurilingual pedagogies, which are reflected in all the activities of the school. And the school provides then opportunities to students to interact with each other in meaningful ways, using their languages and also paying attention to the languages that are being used. And the essence of the school policy is that languages are not primarily conceptualized as subjects to be learned, but rather as instruments towards an increased access to learning and to increase the sense of belonging. And the second essential ingredient proposed by the school is the development of the so-called plurilingual milieu, where children are encouraged to use all the languages within their repertoire. And there are also lots of evidence that document the benefits of such an approach, and appreciating the knowledge and knowing that the knowledge of children is valued, make them take pride in their ability and make them feel confident and motivated to to learn more. And the principal of the school also notes that such an approach increases the metalinguistic awareness and intercultural awareness in all children, not only plurilingual children of the school. And one of the important elements of such a school climate is the eventual de-hierarchization of languages present in the school. But in order to promote such an inclusive vision, inclusive school infrastructure is, of course, not enough, and there is a need for culturally responsive curriculum and pedagogy within the entire schooling process. And key components of linguistically and culturally sensitive teaching include, first of all, collaboration and co-construction of these instructional practices between teachers and learners directly, and they would integrate the language and cultural experiences and contextualize the teaching, which means that all the knowledge that learners get from other environments, be it home or community or other countries, they are being used to facilitate the learning of a new knowledge. And cooperative learning and dialogical methods are often mentioned as important tools to help build on the resources that children bring to the classrooms. Translanguaging is another innovative pedagogy which is often mentioned as a successful approach on how to appreciate different languages present in the classroom. And there are various ways in which teachers can give space for translanguaging in the classroom or in the school halls, ranging from giving children the opportunity maybe to write essays in their own languages, or also allow small group discussions among speakers of the same language. And in the same way, the curriculum and the learning approaches should reflect a philosophy that is inclusive in all nature and reflect also minority cultures, not only majority cultures, because traditionally all the educational materials and official curricula are often not incorporating the views and experiences of many minority groups from the society, including women, different religious groups, or LGBTI community. So for such students, they do need to see their identities reflected in the curriculum so that they consequently can engage with it better. And for the school, it is relatively easy to make adjustments within schools themselves to better balance the curriculum by including books and films, websites that represent the diversity of the classroom, and or including authors from minority, from the writers of the minority background. We also know from literature that family involvement is linked to children's academic and social and emotional development, and also acts as an important source of support for academic achievement of students. And in this case, as we already mentioned before, parents should be considered as primary co-educators. And now, especially in the context of the COVID crisis, we were, as an education community, pushed to think even more in this direction and find a better and more sustainable ways of working with parents. And there are many examples on how can schools better engage with parents and ensure continuity between home and school. For instance, there are a lot of tools available for free to schools and offered by the European Center for Modern Languages. On the slides here, you can also see a few examples which you can check later on. And the final element that I would like to reflect upon is the school community partnerships. UNESCO, for example, recommends that the use of the following approaches that can connect the school to their community better. In this case, the school should be used as a center for social and cultural activities, both for educational purposes, but also for the community. And the participation of learners, of parents, of the community members, teachers, and administrations of different backgrounds should be encouraged in school management, in decision making, in planning, and implementation of the educational programs, in designing, learning, and teaching materials. And again, there are many ways on how schools can engage with the community. I also put some ideas on the slides and also some in the literature at the end of my presentation, but I would like to highlight one interesting example which I came across in Flanders, which is the local council platforms. They are used as a tool to, basically as a tool to create a learning community, a school learning community, and promote collaboration and links between the schools and local stakeholders. And these councils, they basically, they serve as this platform. They bring together social partners, teachers, parents, and other important institutions with the aim to improve the interactions within the school, but and also provide this optimal learning environment and help tackle segregation in schools. And these councils, they provide the analysis of the school environment upon the request of the school, and they can also make agreements and advice with the school on the creation of this optimal social mix in the school, and also give recommendations on how to avoid segregation more practically. And these platforms, they also collaborate with municipalities and keep track of newcomers, and then provide support with the initial assessments and with placements of newcomers in particular schools, and also offer teacher professional development and advice to schools on how to better engage with parents and local communities in the context of this particular school. Of course, this is a more systematic approach to school community with partnerships, which is supported by education authorities, which also makes it more successful, rather than it's being a sole only intervention by one school. But schools need to be enabled to develop and implement a whole school approach, as we also learned from the ETUCE research project, Embracing Diversity in Education. At least 1/3 of unions believe that there are no coherent strategies and policies in place to support the creation of such an inclusive school infrastructure and environment. And based on the study on school innovation and inclusion conducted by PPMI a few years ago, for all schools to be able to develop such characteristics, the whole education system, of course, must innovate and be inclusive. And this, first of all, requires a coherent policy framework that is supported by a longer-term vision on inclusion and ensures system-wide transformation, not just like fragmented responses in particular school regions. And then policies have to be co-constructed with the stakeholders and with the schools themselves. There should be coherence and clarity in all the responses and initiatives at the policy level, and the policy strategy should be accompanied by those supportive initiatives and concrete measures that would help develop the capacity of schools to manage and sustain this change. And evidence demonstrates that the schools that are more likely to develop such culture when they are possess sufficient autonomy over curriculum, teaching methods, staff management, but at the same time are horizontally accountable and also have the capacity and opportunities and relevant platforms to engage in partnerships and networks, and are supported by relevant professional development systems for teachers and school leaders. I tried to put a few references with further examples and research evidence related to whole school approach and how it can be linked with inclusive education and promote it better. I'm sorry I could not be with you live, but I will be happy to answer any questions later on via email. So thank you so much for listening.
So thank you for Hannah for sharing this very interesting presentation on various components of the inclusive education whole school approach. And as Hannah said, you can either email her with if you have any concrete questions about her presentation, but also we will do our best to respond to your questions with my next speaker, Dominique Danau from the SAGO Research, who is a researcher following this project, and she will present you. So what Hannah did, she presented you a European perspective on various components and a kind of scientific perspective, but also shared some interesting examples with you. So Dominique will share more examples with you, and she will also share the perspective of education trade unions who were involved in this research on various issues of the whole school approach, but overall also inclusive education and key elements of it. Thank you, Dominique. I am giving you the floor.
Thank you, Ekaterina. Can I share my screen because I do not have the permission yet?
Yes, please.
I do not have the permission yet to share my screen.
Try again, please.
Yes, now it works. Perfect. So I will start with the beginning and not with the end, I suppose. So good morning, everybody. My name is Dominique Danau, and as Ekaterina already said, so I've been involved in
We cannot see your presentation yet.
No?
Not yet.
No?
And now it works. Yes, thank you.
Okay. So, good morning, everybody. What I will try to do in the next 15 minutes is to give you a presentation of the research, of some of the research results that came out of the research that was done in the framework of the ETUCE project on diversity in education, inclusive education. But I will also use some examples that came out of the previous research in which I was also involved and that was introduced by Ekaterina this morning. In the framework of the CONVINCE project. Now, when I will go into more details about cooperation and the whole school approach, I could not have a better predecessor in the presentation. The previous speaker already presented or gave a good presentation about the whole school approach. So it will be complementary to what I will present later on. So what I would try to do is to start with the objectives and the approach of the research, and then go into the findings. First of all, some opportunities and challenges that were identified by ETUCE members, but also what is inclusive education. And then going to elements, 13 in fact key elements that have been identified on the basis of the research for inclusive education that can also be considered as conditions for implementation. And there I will focus more on cooperation and the whole school approach. So now looking into the objectives of the research, I will not spend too much time on this as Ekaterina proposed it already or presented it already. So there were three main objectives of the research. First of all, to identify changes in society that have an impact on professional education and training. Secondly, to identify training needs of teachers, but also of other education personnel working in a diverse environment, working in a diverse classroom, in a diverse school. And thirdly, also to identify good practices in implementing, but also maintaining inclusive learning environments. Now, as a result, we have two outputs of this research. First of all, the research report that is already available to you. And secondly, the catalog of good practices that we are still working on. Also, these webinars, they will be used as an input into this catalog, but also the other good practices that were already gathered in the framework of other ETUCE projects dealing with inclusive education. The approach of the research, so there was an online questionnaire that was sent to all of the members of ETUC. We had a response rate of 50%, which is not bad at all, meaning 60 ETUC member organizations gave their input into this research coming from 38 countries, so that's quite a good coverage. Desk research was done, of course, to provide some background information, and separately a template was sent to all ETUC members to gather good practices. That will be part of that catalog, but also of the online database. Now, looking into more detail into the findings, one of the first things that we asked the members of ETUC through the survey was opportunities, but also challenges these days for education systems. And as you can see, some of the developments that were identified, they have been identified as a challenge, but an opportunity at the same time. This goes, for example, for social and cultural diversity, of which 89% of the respondents say that it's considered as an opportunity, and 83% also see it as a challenge. This goes as well for technological progress and digitalization. As you can see, 89% of the respondents see this as an opportunity and 96% as a challenge. Now, if we go to the other challenges that were identified, like under-resourcing, of course, an important one, rising inequalities, cybersecurity, and a continuous increasing workload of education personnel. I don't think that these challenges will come as a surprise to you, but even now, the past year, they have been magnified under the current circumstances of the COVID crisis and the measures that were taken in the different countries. So that even adds on a dimension to the challenges that are already there. Inclusive education, what is it in fact? Because when we looked into the literature, but not only through the literature, but it came also very clear across when we were receiving feedback from the ETUC members in the questionnaire, was that there is an evolution in the concept of inclusive education, but also in the implementation of the concept of inclusive education. While it started off with the inclusion of children with disabilities in mainstream education between hyphen, in fact now it's moving to education for all. And when we look to the definition that UNESCO is giving to inclusive education, it's about a process, and I really want to stress that also when I will go into the key elements that came out of the research, key elements of inclusive education. It is a process, and it's a process of strengthening the capacity of the education system to reach out to all learners. We all know the citation, I believe, of UNESCO, every learner matters and matters equally. And that's certainly something to keep in mind when we go through the key elements that I will introduce later. Now, what we also see is that there are quite a number of international frameworks, but also European frameworks, and you find them in the research report more in detail, that are at the background or are underpinning the national frameworks that are in place in relation to inclusive education. Because a majority of the respondents of ETUC members that responded to the survey agree that there is quite a lot already on paper in each of the member states, in each of the countries in Europe. But the issue is that there is quite still some gap between what is on paper and the reality. And the causes of that implementation gap, or these implementation gaps, are under-resourcing, the absence of embedding the voice of educational professionals in the different stages of inclusive education development, but also the implementation, lack of guidance of the professionals, lack of adequate preparation as well, lack of support. And just to illustrate these implementation gaps, I've presented here two citations that were given by respondents in the survey as well. So On paper, it might look very nice and very fine, but the implementation of it in reality shows a different picture. Now I will present you the 13 key elements that came out of the research as being key elements for the implementation, but also the maintenance of inclusive education systems, which can also be conceived as conditions. Now, when you look to this list, it might seem a long list, it might seem a difficult list, but we saw also through the research that different elements of these components are already implemented in different countries, but it's a matter of to further that implementation and to possibly improve what is already existing there and to connect the different elements as well. So some of the elements were already introduced by Hannah as well in the previous presentation. I will try to give some more examples of these elements that came out of the research. Now, first element is about having a clear vision about inclusive education, which is based on a shared understanding of the concept of inclusion in education. And this might sound like an obvious element, an obvious condition. But when we were having discussions within this project, but also in the previous Convince project, this is not the case at all. So there is certainly an issue of having a shared understanding what we mean by inclusion, certainly having in mind what we said about the evolution in the concept of inclusive education throughout the years and the implementation of that concept. Now, important there is also that the different stakeholders who are supposed to be involved in that building of that concept are involved in that, and that the vision on inclusive education is a shared one, at least by all the stakeholders that are involved or that should be involved in it. A second element is about having the necessary policy frameworks and mechanisms in place in order to support the implementation of inclusive education. And important there as well that these frameworks and mechanisms have to be accompanied by sufficient resourcing and public funding. Because we all know the slogan, investing in education is investing in people. But again, there, what we see in reality is not always what the slogan means. And what we see on the basis of the research is that 58% of the respondents, they say that that condition is in fact not in place for the moment in their respective countries. Embracing diversity, considering diversity as an asset rather as a problem. Every learner has his or her unique abilities, learning needs, interests, and in order to see these as an asset rather as a challenge, as a problem, teachers need to have support in that because we all know that the classes are often overcrowded. You see that in one of the next elements that I will present as well. And to care for all these differentiations in learning needs for one teacher is too much. So that's why a next element is about necessary support for teachers in the classroom in order to embrace diversity, in order to implement diversity as an asset instead of a problem. A democratic culture in education institutions, including the meaningful participation of teachers and other education personnel as well as learners, in decision-making, evaluation and improvement processes. Important there is the meaningful participation, because what we often heard as a feedback in the research is that members of ETUCE say that it's often not so much about participation or even considering the voice of education personnel, but rather informing them. So that's why the meaningful participation, meaningful there is very important, but also that the different groups are involved at appropriate moments in time. So not everybody needs to be involved in every little detail. The second element might seem very obvious, but again, out of the research, it seems that it's not that obvious in practice. Initial education and continuing professional development of all education professionals in order to be able to implement inclusive education, and especially in basic teacher education, the necessary tools are not provided for teachers to be able to implement inclusive education. For novice teachers, it is often considered as a real challenge, as a real issue. And then, as I already said, teacher support mechanisms and personnel are important in order to implement inclusive education, in order to embrace diversity. Smaller number of students for teachers to meet the specific needs of students is mentioned in many cases by the members of ETUCE in the research. That support can be under the form of support personnel, remedial teachers or linguistic support personnel, but also in the form of mechanisms. And one of the things that is mentioned here also very often is having the opportunities for exchange and mutual learning. And that's also a research finding that came out of the Convince project, so the predecessor project of this project in which ETUCE was also involved. So the opportunities for teachers, for other education personnel as well, to exchange their experiences, their views, and in that way to learn from each other. Sufficient time within working hours of teachers and other education personnel, it's also something that we see as one of the key elements that, according to 62% of the respondents, this is not the case. And this is also related to professional development of teachers and other education personnel. So this is often not taken into account within the working hours of the teachers. Adequate recruitment and retention policies for teachers and other education personnel. The argument there is that the population of education personnel needs to reflect the diversity in the group of learners in order to fully understand what their needs are. So that is also one of the elements that was often put forward in the research, together with designing appropriate teaching, learning aids, equipment and approaches, whereby cooperative forms of learning is often cited as an adequate, as a relevant, but also effective way to implement inclusive education, since learners are learning from each other. They are put in a setting that they are learning from each other, that they see what the needs of the others are, but also what the assets of the other learners are. A safety and a healthy working and learning environment, which is of course now a very hot issue in times of COVID. It adds another dimension to this aspect. Here it was also related to an environment, a learning environment free from harassment and bullying, including cyber bullying. And as you can see, that a large majority of the respondents, they argue that urgent training is needed in this respect. And this is at the level of teachers, so harassment and bullying in the teacher population, but also from learners to teachers and within the learner groups as well. Adequate assessment and monitoring systems, and we see that at two levels, at the level of education institutions, in order to track progress in the implementation of inclusive education against the frameworks that exist at national level, but also at European level, and at the level of the individual learning processes of students, whereby it is often mentioned in the research that the current tests or the current systems that exist, they still too much focus on performance, on attainment, and not on the promotion of learning for all. And that innovative pedagogical methods like cooperative learning is not always taken into account in the current assessment systems. Cooperation, and this relates very much to what Hannah was already saying, is an essential component also in implementing inclusive education meaningfully and effectively. And what we see that's coming out of this research is that cooperation among education institutions is by the respondents seen as a necessary condition. So 83% of the respondents see that as a necessary condition, while 30%, which is quite a big group, I see, consider that as a missing condition. Cooperation with parents, carers, and families, what was also mentioned by Hannah, is a necessary condition according to 92% of the respondents, and missing according to 15% of the respondents, which is also not negligible. In the research, but that will come back when we have the catalogue of good practices as well, several examples are given of the importance of cooperation in relation to inclusive education. First of all, to have a better understanding of inclusive education, and one of the suggestions made there was to have regular roundtable discussions involving all education stakeholders. Also, in the implementation of inclusive education, cooperation between different actors is necessary to better understand where funding is needed. That was also an aspect that I did not touch upon in the presentation of today, but that was also part of the research. Governments, they need to work with school leaders and parents to listen to their concerns in order to have a better knowledge about the needs, and that's also what the next example is about. And then what I also want to highlight is the professional development and cooperation in that, so participation and exchange and cooperative networks. Teachers should have sufficient time to take part in peer exchange, and continuous professional development should consider to tackle partnerships between schools, NGOs, and other agencies. Also, cooperation in relation to curriculum development, that all education professionals should work together on building the curriculum to meet the needs, the special needs of all students. A last element is about leadership, adequate governance models at educational institutional level, and the whole school approach, whereby leadership is one of the specific elements here that I want to highlight. Now, I will not explain you the whole school approach anymore, because this is already done by the previous speaker, but just to stress here that in the whole school approach, cooperation is considered as an important element, but also leadership, and that leaders in educational institutions, they need to be knowledgeable and well prepared to meet the diverse needs of their learners, and that also here professional support to leadership is an essential part. Coming out of the research, again, 95% of the respondents are in the convinced research, that was, they say that committed leadership for implementation of the whole school approach is a necessary condition. In this research, 83% of the respondents say that committed leadership for the implementation of inclusive education is a necessary condition, while for 24% this is also missing for the moment. And there again, so strategies and policies to support school leaders to adopt an inclusive approach and value diversity are in place according to 69% of the respondents, although to a varying degree, as we can see for 37% of the respondents to a limited degree. And there again, I want to finish with some examples that were given, but that will also be included in the database that will be available as a catalog, but also online, of good practices. There was the Trade Union of Serbia that presented a project about education of migrant children, which was a cooperation between different stakeholders, and that the connection with the stakeholders remained after the project. The Lithuanian trade union organization that you presented a project ECHO-IN, which is still under implementation, and which involves many educational stakeholders, universities, but also Solidar, which is the foundation about humanitarian development. The Norwegian approach strongly emphasizing parental participation. In Scotland, the Empowering Schools agenda, which was reform in education in 2018, if I remember well, emphasizing the importance of cooperation. Cooperation at local level, fitting well within the whole school approach, and which was put forward by the Bulgarian, the Hungarian, and the UK members in the research. And again, cooperation, exchange, mutual learning, which was emphasized by the German and by the Irish members in the research. So I want to end with a sentence that I started with as well, so that the implementation and the maintenance of inclusive education is a journey, is an exciting journey, as you can see in the picture on the right-hand side as well, but also, and perhaps most of all, a participative and a learning journey. It's not a goal in itself. It is something to work on. It's a learning process for all those involved, but also a very beautiful one, a very challenging one. And that's where I want to end. And of course, I'm available to answer the questions that you have. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dominique. This was a very comprehensive presentation of our findings in the research, but also thank you for presenting some of the findings of the previous research as adding value to this one. We have heard a very complex and very comprehensive presentation of the whole school approach to inclusive education. We talked about various dimensions of it and the key role of cooperation of different stakeholders in it. So right now, I would like to open the floor for questions. If you have any questions regarding Hannah's presentation or Dominique's presentation, please raise your hand. You can see it under the reactions button on the bottom of your screen, and we will take your question. Or maybe if there are any comments on the presentations. There were also some interesting examples both in Hannah's and Dominique's presentation. I do not see any hands raised yet. Yes. Thank you, Bodo. We also appreciate the contribution of education trade unions to this research. We wouldn't be able to do it without them. All right, I do not see immediate questions. Alexandra Corneia, would you like to ask a question? Alexandra?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. I have more a comment, not a question. I know the project very well, and I have more a comment. I am very happy to see so many colleagues today with us at this webinar, and I would like to thank you to Dominique for her work. It was a huge work, really. And all of data that Dominic presented to us are very important for all of us because can support our participation in various projects and obtaining funds for transform our schools in inclusive schools. We know the budgets in our countries are not very generous with something like this. To transform a school in an inclusive school, it is a huge work, as Dominic also say, and requires not only adaptation for the environment, the school building and the school environment, but also need a lot of training of the educational staff and the involvement of the school leaders. The school principals are the key here, and their involvement and their cooperation with the rest of the school staff, the teachers and the other people involved in the educational process is very important. So because of this, we need funds, and all the data that Dominic offered to us today are very important in order to support those kind of projects that we can do it in the future. So for this, thank you, Dominic, to you. It was a huge work, I know. And I would like to ask to all our colleagues, are people here that I know, and I know their experience, to enter and to complete with good practices the database, because I know they have very good practices in their countries, and all of those best practices are very important for the rest of us. So we can support each other by this network created by this project, only to sharing best practices. And I think after this webinar, please enter on the project page and try to share with us your best practices, because it will be a huge support for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. And thank you for highlighting the importance of the funding and financial support for various initiatives. Indeed, this is also a crucial part of the implementing inclusive education. And I would like to also support your call to our participants to share your good practices with us and to continue sharing them. It's not a one-time call. After this webinar, we will also send you the forms that can be filled in so that your practices can be shared online in the database. It is important that we have a platform where we can share the good practices, not only from trade unions, but also from specific education institutions or national good practices. So thank you very much. I see there is a question from Joseph. Yeah, I will read it out loud, Dominic, maybe for you. Are there any specific insights or concerns about the role of teacher education in the whole school approach to inclusive education that you would like to elaborate on? So specific insights or concerns about the role of teacher education, professional development in the whole school approach.
Okay, can I take the question? Yes.
Please go ahead.
Yes, a large concern there that was shared in the research coming from the different members that participated in the research was especially for novice teachers. So that basic teacher education does not deliver the sufficient tools for novice teachers to be equipped to work in a diverse classroom. So that for them, in order to be able to implement inclusive education, it's necessary that basic education for them is very hands-on and based on their needs, which is not always the case, apparently. So therefore, it's also important, one of the other elements that I mentioned, that training needs are monitored at a regular basis and are not just one-off exercise. We've tried to do it now in this research, and on the basis of that, some things came to the forefront. But it's something, in fact, that needs to be done on a continuous basis, to see what are the training needs, what are the further professional development needs of teachers as well. So that's something to be stressed, I think, not only now, but also in the future.
Thank you very much, Dominique. And I will just add to what Dominique said, that one of the annexes that we did for the research report is actually on the training needs of teachers, academics, trainers, and other educational personnel. So I invite you to check it on the website, and it shows various various dimensions and various concerns that teachers and our affiliates raised regarding the training needs, including on the whole school approach. All right, so thank you very much. I don't see any other questions so far, but Dominique stays with us for the whole webinar. So if there will be more questions popping up later on, please feel free to ask. And we already heard a lot of interesting examples, national examples. And now I would like to invite our national speakers. And I will start from Elena Papa-Mikael from the Cyprus Pedagogical Institute of the Ministry of Education of Cyprus. She will tell you more about the EU Council of Europe project on teaching controversial issues, and in particular on developing the training for teachers and school leaders, on including on the topic of whole school approach to inclusive education. So Elena, welcome to the webinar, and I invite you to take the floor.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to see you even in this way. And I'm just going to share my screen so you can confirm that you can see my first slide, hopefully. Is everything okay?
Yes, excellent.
Okay, perfect. So I'm very happy to speak to you today about one of the most exciting projects. Well, two basically. It was a series of two projects that I was involved in. I was very happy to be involved in the project in the first place because we had an amazing collaboration with the other partners, but also it's very satisfactory to see that training packages or other material that's being created through projects is actually used years later on, because it was 6-7 years ago when we first started working on these projects. Obviously, just for the beginning, to have a shared and common definition of controversial issues are obviously issues which arouse strong emotions, feelings, and they may divide public opinion in any society. They're not the same in every society, and they're not the same from time to time. They're very difficult to discuss because people have different views about them. They have they're based on different ideologies, and the perceptions that we have about them can lead to great disagreements, and sometimes, and this unfortunately happens, and that's the aim to avoid, even violence. So controversy is found everywhere around us, wherever we look, and within schools, even if we think that kids are not affected by them, they really are, because they're simply everywhere, from advertisements to demonstrations, to art, to the legal context, to anything. And an issue may become controversial, first of all, because of the context, because of the time, the period that we're looking at. And if we're talking about the school, it's affected by the media, the school location, the political climate, the teachers, the parents, and the students' background, and obviously the legal framework of each context. Now, the first part of our project was the project that led to the creation of a teacher training package. It's available in various languages. I have all the links on my presentation, so you'll be able to find the material in several languages if you wish to later. So the first one was the creation of this teacher training pack. it was implemented in all the partner countries and the supporting countries as well that participated in this project. And the aim was to strengthen the capability and the confidence of teachers and school leaders in dealing with controversial issues in the first place, especially the ones that come up unexpected within the class. I mean, we're all in education one way or another, so I'm sure you've all had experiences of children maybe asking, Miss, is it a sin to be gay? Or Miss, can a child have two moms? Or is there heaven and hell? Or any question that may come up that may touch on controversial issues. And the answer is really simple. Well, at least it's complicated, but there's also a simple answer to that. The way to empower teachers to deal with these issues is for them to act upon teaching controversial issues. So we start with something that's not too hot in our place in order to be able to cultivate the skills and the strategies and become empowered into teaching something that might be hotter later on, after or the student become familiar with these topics. An example I will give here is in Cyprus, I suggest to teachers that they start teaching about bullfighting, for example. Bullfighting in Cyprus is not a hot issue. So it's not like teaching the same topic in Madrid or somewhere else. We're not going to discuss, though, Turkish Cypriot and Greek Cypriot missing persons as a first controversial topic to begin with, because that's a very hot one. So that's just an idea and a glimpse of the training pack. The results, as I mentioned, was this teacher training program. It was also accompanied by a scoping paper on the importance and some literature review on teaching controversial issues within the citizenship and human rights education and democratic education. And the second part of this first very successful program was to take this information and this knowledge that we got from working together with these partners and move it to a whole school training tool. So the second part was about developing a strategy for handling controversy in various forms within a whole school level by mainly head teachers and other senior officers or managers in the school. Most of the partners were the same, and the idea was to create a whole school training tool on handling controversial issues, another scoping paper on the importance of the role of school leaders and senior managers in managing controversial issues within the school, and a practical how-to guide with answers and questions, and also something that this can be transferred easily across Europe, I think, a self-evaluation matrix on key aspects of school policies and practices that impact the school's management of controversial issues. So this can also be found, and it's available in the link that I uploaded. Now, the idea of a whole school approach might be something that we discuss and we consider important in many ways and on many levels, but it's also necessary to look at the why it's needed, because it needs to permit the vision, the training, the support, any concerns that may arise from professionals and also from the individuals within the school. It relates to child protection. It definitely relates to the school ethos and culture, the way we react to a controversial issue during break time is not irrelevant to how we deal with it within the classroom. So what happens in the playground, what happens in the school toilets, what happens in the school staff room is very relevant to also how I react to controversial issues within the curriculum, or how I identify them, if I identify them as a teacher in the curriculum. How many minutes do I have left, Katerina? I forgot to keep track of time. Let me know if I'm too...
3 minutes left.
Perfect. Okay. So the whole school approach when discussing, when dealing with controversial issues, or when teaching them planned in a planned way, needs to be related to creating at the same time a supportive school culture. So any child from any family with any ideology and any religion or any political beliefs, they feel safe in this environment. And obviously, I will draw a line to where political beliefs or religious practices are acceptable or not, if I can use this word. We're talking about everything happens within a framework of human rights, okay? So we're not accepting or discussing anything as controversial. If there's a racist view or a violent practice that may be considered cultural or anything by a certain group, it doesn't mean that we consider it controversial. We draw the line where the human rights, where there are human rights violations, okay? So all of this will connect the curriculum, the school culture, the community, and it involves every member of the school community, not just the teachers, not just the students, but also the people working within the school that may not teach, but do other work, the administration of the school, and everybody else. So how to proceed with this, because it can be very scary from my experience. A lot of teachers come to the seminars and they're very, very worried at the beginning. How could I ever, for example, approach the issue of, for example, doing or not doing a morning prayer in the classroom? That's a huge controversy in our context, for example. There's teachers who may agree or disagree. It's their right, obviously, but they still don't know how to approach it. So what we need to realize is that controversy is not a problem. It's a natural part of life in a democracy. Controversial issues are there anyway, so we can pretend to hide them under the carpet, but they're still going to be there. It's just that students will not trust us with them if we ignore them. And discussing them is an essential part of democratic education, as they can arise anywhere at any point. Now, there's a third guide, which was published after the two projects, which was good practices from the various countries that were implemented parts of the projects. So I have the links here as well. This is only in English, I'm afraid. The others are in various languages. And now to finish up, I would like to say that in Cyprus specifically, the way we've incorporated the outcomes of these projects have great relevance to a very important whole school policy of the ministry, which is the anti-racist policy of the ministry, which gives schools specific steps and guidelines on how to deal with racist incidents within schools. And when I'm saying racism, I don't mean just based on ethnicity or gender. It's all sorts of identities that may be affected by racist incidents within a school. So gender identity, sexual orientation, any religion, any sort of diversity is included. So we've incorporated the trainings at the Cyprus Pedagogical Institute within the school support networks that we have every year for the past 4 years on supporting schools in order to implement the anti-racist policy. So These came together, and it matched really well the whole school approach with the anti-racist policy, because obviously they're very directly linked. As I said before, controversy is one thing, respecting anyone's views is what we're aiming for, and everybody feeling safe and respected. But at the same time, there's a line of where and how we describe something as racist. So this has helped us to bring the two together and to build upon that in order to promote this whole school approach that counters racism on the one hand, and on the other hand, gives enough space and a safe environment to students to be able to express themselves on controversial issues. And I finish with two of my finishing slides in my trainings. There's usually the fear of what if I touch upon a controversial issue and somebody says something racist? Or what if I can't change the opinion of people with racist perceptions? What if I don't manage to reduce the prejudice against a certain group? The answer is that that's not the aim. The aim is not to convince anyone. We all know we can't change our views easily, especially not if somebody just tells us something. But the aim is to be realistic and be confident in tackling controversial issues without the pressure to change attitudes, simply by accepting that the goal is to raise awareness and to promote critical thinking among students about them. I hope I've been okay with time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elena. Very interesting presentation and very hot topic. This was actually in our research, we saw that controversial issues were one of the key problems and one of the key topics that our members, but also overall the educational community needed a training on. So this was very useful, and I'm sure that our participants will follow the links in your presentation and learn more and check the toolkits. So we heard the good practice from the European level project that was implemented, and we particularly heard about Cyprus experience of implementing it. And now I would like to move to the trade union practice from Germany. So I'm going to give floor to Bodo Busch and Janina Henkes, who will talk about the GUW project, Schools of Diversity. Bodo, Janina.
Yes,
You.
Here I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Great.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you for letting us be here. It's so great to have this communication on this international and European level. And I heard a lot of very interesting and good examples. For instance, also the School Against Racism, that's also a project school that we have in Germany and that we as GEW support. So my name is Janina and I am the Federal Equality Officer of the German Education Union called GEW. The GEW has gender mainstreaming, anti-sexism and diversity policies firmly embedded in its structures. The GEW is organized on a federal level, as education policy in Germany differs from state to state. And therefore there is a queer working group in each of the union's states associations that deals with LGBTI+ issues and in the education sector. There's various topics that are worked on here. In particular, there is the representation of diversity in textbooks, in educational materials. There's the pedagogy of diversity, protection against discrimination, and the establishment of nationwide complaints offices in the event of violations of the General Equality Act. There's a federal working group that meets and elaborates positions, exchanges of ideas on a regular basis. And there's also Bodo Busch. he is one of the honorary spokespersons, and Bodo will now present a school project that is supported by the GEW, and after that I'm going to jump in again. So Bodo, please.
Thank you. First, thanks for the slides to the project coordinator, Frank Pohl, who is presented today. But I at least was at the vocational college where I teached was part of the project, so I hope I can explain that to you. Next slide, please. It's called School for Diversity, and as you can see by the label, it says it explicitly tackles homo and transphobia by the claim, welcome, we are open, LGBT, queer friendly. It relays on two wheels, which both need to be well inflated and well turning. It's on the one wheel is a network of project schools and interested schools, and the other wheel is a teacher training program. Next, please. A main aspect of being a project school is ensuring visibility of LGBT and queer themes. Therefore, project schools have to place the label, we are open, LGBT, queer friendly, by an official act in a central and visible place of a school building. You have some celebrations here. Okay, next, please. The situation of LGBT students and teachers in Germany may be characterized by two findings from a representative school study for the capital state, Berlin, in 2012. You can see it on the slide. Concerning students, 62% of sixth grade students use the word gay or fag as an insult, 40% use lesbian as an insult word. And concerning the teachers, only 15% of the teachers at Berlin schools know the obligatory sex education guidelines, although school administrators and teachers are basically rather positive to the thematization of gay and lesbian identity in the classroom. But on the other hand, every fourth teacher laughs at homophobic statements that arise in the class, was a finding in 2012. Next, please. This situation was the reason for the 2008 launch for the initiative School Without Homophobia, School for Diversity, which was the former name of a project. It was founded in the federal state of North Rhine-Westphalia by a lesbian, gay, anti-violence project and the peer-to-peer LGBTIQ education project Schlau. It started with a campaign finding people to support the project. It aims at strengthening schools against discrimination of LGBT students and teachers. And it advises schools, students, the consulting teachers, the school principals, social workers in school. The problem at the beginning was the project was not integrated into the educational system. It was starting from NGOs. Next, please. The project has very few but strategic obligations for schools that participate in the school network. They are listed here. All school bodies have to give their confirmation. The majority of the teachers, the parents' representation, the students' representation have to officially give their confirmation they are part of a project. They have to perform activities every school years. They have to report their activities every year to the coordination unit. And central is also the visibility of a label and of the activities against homophobia and transphobia for the public. The next, please. The second wheel of the project is the teachers training unit. That means it is duty in the initial professional trainer teaching formation, and It is offered to all schools in continuing education, at least in the 2 states of North Rhine-Westphalia and of Berlin. Next, please. The 2 project wheels produce a dynamic of amplification. More schools in the network increase the demand for teachers training, and participants of the teachers trainings are motivated to have their schools join the network. Next, please. The project can also be seen as an e-bike with a big power supply. That is the support of the LGBTIQ community. For example, the GEW and its LGBTI caucus are seen as a natural partner of a project, but also queer NGOs like the community centers Rubicon and Rosa Strippe. You see the logos below, with Rainbow Family, queer refugee or trans counseling and anti-discrimination projects, the peer-to-peer youth educators Schlau, the University Gender Studies Gestik at Cologne University, or the Berlin Queer Format Education Center, or the Federal Network for Queer Education. Next, please. These are 2 slides showing the development of a school network in 2012, where the official cooperation to the federal state of North Rhine-Westphalia started. There were 4 of 5 schools in the school network. My school was the 6th one to join the network. Next, please. In 2018, there are in the state of North Rhine-Westphalia 45 schools, and there are schools joining in the other states of Bavaria, Berlin, Hamburg, and Hesse. For comparison, you have to say this is the school network is a lighthouse approach. You have 45 schools in North Rhine-Westphalia. In comparison, there are 6,000 schools in North Rhine-Westphalia in total. And we have about 1,000 schools in the school network of schools against racism. Next, please. There are various project activities. For example, the Vocational School for Design, where I have worked, made class contests developing these project posters you see on the left. Or they had an official student group joining the Cologne Pride March when 2 years ago, when we still had Pride marches before COVID. And even under COVID conditions, schools celebrate joining the network, as you can see below. And more details in German can be read in the actual 2020 project report, which you can download from the QR code below. Next, please. In Berlin, project flyers were issued in an adapted green Berlin edition. And another Cologne school did this wall painting on the theme of queer refugees. And you see also photos from the celebration about joining the project from Berlin and Hamburg schools. Next, please. And Janine, you can continue.
Yes, I can. Yeah, thank you, Bodo. So next, please. Yes, you can just see that in Germany, it's very different from state to state how many schools participate. Next, please. So there is one central thing is missing, which would be the federal coordination. That is the aim for the next years, and hopefully we're getting there. Next, please. As I know that we already reached the 10 minutes. I just can show you now. There's again the QR code with the report of the school, which is in Germany, but maybe you are interested in learning German and read it. And in any case, there again is our email addresses. There is Frank, which is the leader of this project, and you can ask him. You can ask Bodo if you have specific questions about the teams, the LGBTI team in the German Education Union. And of course, there's me, and you're very welcome to contact me if you have questions about our equality policies in the German Education Union and how we network, how we strategize, and so on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Janina. Thank you, Bodo, for this very interesting presentation. I think it's amazingly shows the whole idea behind whole school approach. I love the picture of the bike, how there are so many different components and different wheels that work there. And plus, additionally to this, the support of the community is extremely important, the LGBTQ community. So very interesting project. Thank you very much. And I would like to move now to Israel and to ask Yossi Mikal from Israeli Teacher Union to present to present the Israeli context, but also their good practices and about the inclusion in Israeli schools and in particular students with special needs. Thank you, Yossi. Please go ahead with sharing your presentation.
Oh, okay. Can I share my presentation because I added a little bit something to it?
Yes, you can share it yourself. Yes.
Okay. Oh, I'll just start from the beginning. Sorry. Sorry. Just a minute.
No problem.
Oh, okay. So thank you, Ekaterina, and I want to thank also Hannah and Dominique for really a well presented and very meaningful presentation. I think that they really included most or all of the challenges and aspects of inclusion that all of us are facing when we are talking about all-inclusive schools. And I will talk about some of the issues that Dominique also mentioned in her presentation regarding what is happening in Israel in that relation. So first of all, I just want to say that we can talk about the inclusion of many groups of students, and each of them has different challenges as we see it. And when we talked or we wrote to each other, me and Ekaterina, we decided to talk about the challenge of inclusion of children or students with special needs and disabilities. So I will give just a general background, and then I will focus on the issue of the students, and I hope it will be clear. Okay.
Yes, we have your presentation ready. If you like, I can share it for you.
Okay. So I will stop the share. Okay. First of all, I want to say that the challenge of inclusion is really big in Israel because there are many groups of students that we have to think about in including them in our schools. And I just give you a small example of these groups. First of all, we have the newcomers, or as we call them, the immigrants, that are coming from different countries and to become citizens in our country. And we have a large group of students coming from Ethiopia, and then we have a large group of students that come from France and from the former countries of the Soviet Union. So each of them is a challenge on his own, you know, to include them because they come from different cultures and different languages, and the teachers have to enable them to become equal partners in the learning process. Then we have also the students with special needs and disabilities, which I will talk later. And of course, we have many groups of minorities that all of them need to be equally included in our schools, in our education system, and each of them need to get different answers on this process of inclusion. And I can just say a few of them. We have, of course, the Arab community. We have the working migrants that come from different countries. We have a small community of refugees. And of course, we have the social minority, which one of them is the LGBTQ students. And for each of them, we need to find different solutions in order to include them in the best way in school. So we don't see them as, you know, as one group of students that all of them have to be included in the same way. Each of them need different aspects of inclusion. And because of the short time that I have, I will just talk about one group today. Okay, next slide. Also, I want to talk generally about some of the challenges that we have, and you met them on Dominique's presentation. First of all, there is a very big cultural diversity. Students come from different countries, different cultures, both Western cultures, both Eastern Eastern countries and Eastern cultures. And when you want to build the curriculum, when you want to teach in different method, you have to adjust to this diversity, and it's very complicated. We also have a religious diversity. We have students that come from secular families, secular communities. At the other hand, we have students that come from ultra-Orthodox communities. And one of the big problems or the big challenges is how to adapt the core curriculum to all these religious groups, because not all of them accept the core curriculum of the Ministry of Education, and you have to do changes. Also, we have the issue of multi-language society. Two languages in our country are the official languages, Hebrew and Arab, but we also have people that talk a large, like 1 million people that are immigrants that talk Russian. We have the communities that came from France that talk French, and we have the people from Ethiopia that talk the Amharic language. And you can imagine for a teacher sitting in a class when she has three students from Ethiopia, 4 from France, 2 from Russia, 2 that come from England or the US. Not all of them know Hebrew, and she has to teach all of them, and you know, it's a big challenge. Also, we have, in regard to students with special needs and disabilities, we have a very wide range of students with a very wide range of needs. We have both the physical disabilities, we have the students with different kinds of illnesses or allergies, we have the students with behavioral disorder, we have the teacher with autism disorder, we have so many, as you probably know, and probably all of you have to deal with them in your countries. And in order to top it, of course, the resources are limited. And I think also Dominique talked about the limitation of resources when you have to really include so many students and give so many answers, but the resources that you have are limited, you are in a big problem. And I will talk about it. Also, we talk about the working conditions of teachers. A teacher is trained to work with a certain class, usually a class that is of students that come from basically a common culture or have a common language. And when she has to deal with this diversity, first of all, she needs the training, she needs the support, she needs the resources. She, he or she, they need all of this. And I will talk about a struggle that ITU now is leading in relation to this issue of working conditions in regard to the students with disabilities. Finally, the last thing is that we are obliged to act according to the CRC, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and we are examined according to the convention, and we have to look up to the standards of the convention. And this really it poses another challenge for us how to do it with such a big diversity among the students. So these are some of the challenges that we are dealing with in our education system. And I will try now to focus only on the students with special needs and disabilities on the next slide. Okay. First of all, I want to tell you that we have a law in Israel, which is a special education law. It's called the special education law. According to this law, every school has to accept, include, and give answer to every student that is accepting to this school. It can have 1 year a student with hearing impairment, another year a student with autism disorder. The school has no ability to say that they don't want to accept a certain student. They have to accept him, and they have to do all the adjustments and all the actions that are needed in order to include it. Some of them, they get help from the government, the Ministry of Education, and some of them, they have to find the solution by themselves. And the school does not have the mandate to say, I don't want this student, transfer him to another school. There is no such possibility. The minute the student enters the school, no matter what his disability or his special need, he has to give the answers in order to make the best inclusion of this student in school. So the inclusion can be, first of all, expressed on the environmental or the technical aspect of inclusion. For example, if you have a school of 700 students and you have one student with hearing impairment, you have to build an acoustic class for this student, which will learn in this school, I don't know, maybe for 6 years or 8 years, and the acoustic class will remain at that school. But the issue is that you don't have to have 10 students with hearing impairment or 100. Even if you have one, you have to build such a class. And of course, you can imagine that if you have to build such a class and at the same time you want to build a playing ground for all the 700 students, as a principal, you are in a big dilemma where to put your resources. Would you do something for 700 students, or would you do something for one student? And I can tell you, because I know many principals, it's a big dilemma. And some principal will decide to do something for this student, some will decide to do it for 700 students. And the problem is that the willing of the principals to do the best they can to include such a student is not always backed up or supported by resources from the government. So this is one issue. Other schools, will accept a student with a walking disability. So they will have to build an elevator in school. To build an elevator in school is a huge amount of money. And again, would you do it? Would you enable him to be able, the student is learning on a class on the floor ground, but he has laboratories on the third ground, the third level. How will he get to the laboratories? So they have to build him the elevator. And again, it's one student among 700 or 800 or 1,000 students. Where do you put your resources? Second, I want to give you an example about students that have allergies. We now have a new trend of schools that are called schools free of something. For example, there are schools free of peanuts because there is a child learning at that school which has a big allergy for peanuts. Or there is a school free of lactose because there is a child that has the allergy for the milk, for the dairy, the dairy food. So again, when a student with such an allergy comes into a school, the school has no mandate to say we don't want them because we have to become a peanut-free school. They have to do everything they can in order to including, and this means to change. It doesn't mean only to change the name of the school. It means that now they have to change they have to educate all the students what are the foods that they can bring or not bring into school, what it means if you bring something that is not allowed for that students that it can bring them even on the edge of death. So it's like an educational process that you have to go through in order to really enable such a student to be included fully in all activities in school, both the social, the learning, the pedagogical activities, and not to be limited to one room or to one space because of his allergy. And the third thing that I want to say is that we have many training courses for teachers that have to work with students with special needs. Teachers have to go every year through some kind of training course in order to get the tools to work with these students. But on the other end, there is a problem. How many courses can you do in order to understand the needs of all kinds of disabilities, of all kinds of disorders? Of course, it's not realistic. And so what happens is that sometimes teachers have to face the challenge of including or integrating a student or a child in their class, and they don't always have the tools to do it. And there we have a problem. So this is one of the things that ITU is now struggling, and we have a big struggle about it. This will be the last thing that I will say. But another action that I think is very meaningful, and I think is one of the best tools that I know regarding the inclusion of special needs students is the UEP. Okay, I just translated it to English, the UEP. It's not really called that in Hebrew, but the meaning is that you consider each child, each student with special needs or disabilities, and building a unique educational program, which means where in the environment he will learn, what will be some of the special help that he will get in order to be in the same pace with the class. Will he get different kinds of therapies that will help him in some of the disorders you need the therapies that he will get. So when you see a student, you know that behind him there is an entire big program that is only was built for him specifically, not for children with special needs like him, for him specifically, by his name. If there is one that is called after me, like me, Yossi, and he has a UEP, the UEP is only for him. And at the same time, you have like 20 or 30 UEPs for different other students. And I think it's a very powerful tool that really considers all the needs of that student in order to include him on the best way. But
I'm
not
sorry,
everything.
Yossi, may
Yeah.
I ask you to wrap up so
Yeah.
we have enough time for questions as
I
well?
just gone to the most important thing now that happens. 2 years ago, the government declared a reform on the special education, and according to this reform, each child will get a specific package of resources and help that will help him to be included on the best way in school. But the committees got different criteria, and the problem is that many students that before got help, they don't get it according to the new criteria, and they are integrated in regular schools with no help, no resources, teachers that don't know how to deal with them, and they have another 35 or 40 students in that school, in that class. So ITU for 2 years is leading a very big struggle against the Ministry of Education to change this reform, because according to this reform, both the students and the teacher are not doing their best, are not getting their best, and inclusion is really, I think, harmed or is not a whole inclusive approach, as we can say. So if you will want to learn more about the reform and what the struggle that we are doing, you are welcome to talk to me. On the other presentation, I wrote at the end my email, so I can write it on chat if you want, Ekaterina.
Thank you very much, Yossi. For your email, we can actually get a new PowerPoint presentation from you and send it to all the participants so that they have your contact details as well. Thank you. Very interesting presentation, and indeed the importance of the school infrastructure and the dilemma that you mentioned about where to put the resources is also very crucial. And I'm sure that many our colleagues will also share the same issues with you. And I would also say, would like to say that ETUCE supports ITU and the fight against this reform. And we hope that in the end you succeed to make it much more inclusive, this new educational law. So as we are a little bit behind the time, before we move to our last good practice from Malta, I would like to actually open the floor for questions or comments, as we have all three presenters of good practices here with us. So if you have any questions to them or comments on their presentations, please raise the hand. Again, it's under the reactions on the bottom of your Zoom. I open the floor now for you. You can also post a question in the chat. I will read it out loud. It also applies to the speakers. If speakers have questions to each other, you can also raise them. All right, I do not see immediate questions. I see that all speeches were very useful. Thank you to our speakers, of course. All right, then, Janina, did you want to add something?
Oh, no, I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay, yes, all right. All right, if there are no questions, I assume there is a lot of information and a lot of interesting practices that were shared today, and participants probably are still working through the presentations. All of our participants shared or will share their contact details, so you can always contact them directly, or you can contact us and me. We will forward the questions and continue this fruitful discussion. So then I will move to the last good presentation that we have from Malta. It's also a recorded video, as unfortunately Marco Bonici from MET was not able to be with us today, but it's also a very interesting presentation because it shows the whole school approach in a specific context of Malta, which is also quite different from many other European countries. So I will ask my IT support to share the video with you now. And again, if there are issues with the quality of the slides, you have received all the PowerPoint presentations in your emails today, so you can always check the slides there. Thank you.
Hello, thanks for joining me. It's Marco Bonici, the president of the Malta Union of Teachers. I'm going to provide an overview about the work carried out by the Union and also the Maltese educational systems with regards to some of the practices which we are adopting. Let's start with some information about the Malta Union of Teachers. It was founded in 1919 by Antonio Gallia, who was a teacher, and it is the first registered trade union in Malta. Actually, we have celebrated the 100th anniversary in 2019. It has a dual role, the professional and trade unionistic role, which are both important for us, and we are members of ETUCE and also of EI. At a national level, we are members of Forum, which is a confederation of 14 trade unions. We are also in a political union. Obviously, we don't deal into any partisan political aspects, but also we have obviously our interests of members at heart. And we are the Union for Education and Girls across all sectors because we represent all sectors from kindergarten to university. The setup of the Malta Union of Teachers consists of a general conference, which is held every 4 years, and there is an election of council, which is also obviously elected in line with the general conference. The current administration of the union was elected in June 2020, in last June, and obviously officials and council have been elected for the term from 2020 to 2024. The current full-time officials of the union are myself, the president. We have the senior vice president, who is Elaine Germani, a vice president, who is Claudette Mintoff, and we have the assistant general secretary, who is Chris Bella. We are currently 4 full-time officials at the union. We have our structures at school level, consisting of school delegates, the traditional shop stewards, and also school committees who cater for a number of issues pertinent to the respective schools. From time to time, we also have working groups who carry out some work on special tasks. The recent activities of the MIT were practically, last year we launched a foundation. It's called Fondazione Sartor, and it is the professional arm of the union. As we said earlier, we have a dual role, the trade unionistic role and the professional role. The foundation is taking care of the professional role, and it is already very active through publications, and eventually it will be involved also in training of educators and in other duties pertaining to the professional remit of the trade union. We are also widening our membership base with the inclusion of allied professionals now. We have been doing this in the past years, and the membership is growing even in areas where previously MIT had no representation. We are also offering new services to members, including, for example, an improved legal assistant and also therapeutic services by professionals in the field to cater for the psychological aspects and needs of members. And basically, as with other organizations or unions, we have been working on the pandemic and the mitigation measures for the past years, and our efforts were practically all focused on the effects of the pandemic. Basically, our interest was that members do not suffer any financial losses or any, obviously, redundancy caused by the pandemic, and we managed to achieve that as well. Some overview about the Maltese context. Basically, The government is the major employer of educators. They are employed in the public service, where there is a collective agreement which is regulating all public service employees, including obviously educators. And then there is a separate sectoral agreement which is negotiated between us and the government, which regulates educators working in our sector. Then there is also the public sector. The public sector is a sort of branch of the public service, and it caters for a number of institutions. Most of them are post-secondary institutions, and there are separate collective agreements negotiated between MUT and the government for employees in these institutions. We have also church, which is a major employer in Malta. Every church school is an independent employer, and there is a semi-autonomous structure. Basically, salaries are provided by the government, so there is some control over there. But then there is a collective agreement between us and all church schools, and that regulates the employment matters. Then we have independent schools. Independent schools are also separate employers. They are autonomous, although government is financing some aspects. For example, it is financing resources or the provision of learning support educators or educators working with students with special needs. So the autonomy of independent schools is also dependent on the financing of the government as well. And educators are regulated by separate collective agreements. We have collective agreements with most independent schools. Basically, in the past 4 years, we signed 7 collective agreements for educators in the different areas. They are listed over there. The major agreement is the agreement covering state schools, which is called the sectoral agreement. And then there are a number of agreements which follow and which relate mostly to our grades in state, church, or as independent schools. Basically, we have a number of agreements also which are currently being negotiated. Obviously, the pandemic has delayed most negotiations, and this is a list of the current negotiations being carried out. Basically, we have a new agreement which is being carried out, which is related to the Institute for Education. It's a newly established institute, which is a training institute for educators. It was established some 5 years ago. We managed to obtain the recognition of all grades working at the institute, and now we are negotiating an agreement on their behalf. Basically, our experience with regards to the whole school approach, basically we can consider the effect of the foreign workforce, which had a major impact on the Maltese island, and obviously it impacted also education. Basically, the number of foreigners who are being registered in the workforce was increasing by 15,000 per year, which is a considerable amount, considering obviously the population of the Maltese islands. This was affected as well by the pandemic, so there was a considerable decrease in this number, but we are predicting that this will eventually increase during the period post-pandemic. Basically, the majority are Europeans, but there are a number of TCNs who are also obviously seeking employment in Malta. Now, if we consider a population of 450,000, which has been quite stable for a number of years, the impact of 15,000 plus per year, obviously, it impacted the population. So the estimate of foreign workers, including their families, was approximately 100,000 before the start of the pandemic. Most probably, this number has been reduced because some returned to their respective countries, but it is still quite high. The education provision, which obviously we are providing, the increase in foreign workers impacted the education provision. For example, we had some primary schools which were closing down and have been reopened due to the influx of foreign students, and even the demographics are changing. Basically, we are seeing that the age is decreasing from 45 to 35, and this obviously shall also impact eventually the students who shall be attending schools. Basically, I'm sharing 2 examples of good practices. There are many. These are just examples. For example, School A, which is a school in the northern area of Malta, it's a primary school. It has 70% foreign population. So basically, there are 60 nationalities attending the school. Some of them are quite predominant in the school. So it depends on the area and the concentration. Basically, the way management is dealing, and obviously educators are dealing with the situation, is to try to integrate these students through a whole school approach by revisiting everything that is being done, so that to ensure that there is no one who is being excluded, and to support all students. Basically, there is support provided even through central government. It is provided by the Migrants Learning Unit, which is a new unit. It was established some years ago. And there are personnel who attend also school. Basically, some of them are native people. Obviously, they speak the languages of students, and they have their same cultural or religious backgrounds. And these assist the school, obviously, to ensure the integration of the students. Obviously, the welcoming atmosphere that is being created in the school, basically, it has to be balanced with the need to establish regulations. So there are still regulations which are applicable, and these are obviously enforced for all, both for students who are coming from a migrant background and also for Maltese students. The Maltese culture is still present, and it has to be maintained in schools, because obviously schools have their respective ethos, and all students are expected to learn Maltese as a foreign language. That's a requirement once you study in Malta. Basically, this is another school, which is a secondary school. It's in the central area, and this has a considerable number of students coming from Libya. Basically, it was due to the Libyan revolution some years ago, and also to an Islamic school which closed down again some years ago. So there is an impact of a number of students coming from Libya, which obviously it affects the whole running of the school, and even some aspects of culture and of teaching and learning. Basically, there was an increase in radicalization and extremism for some time. Luckily, I think that the school is managing to address it, but we had a couple of incidents over there. And obviously, management is working with teachers, with educators, to try to ensure that the students are welcome, to try to integrate them, and to try to obviously establish the best relationship between educators and students, and also between students themselves. Basically, there are also the support from the ministry, including the support from the imam, who is obviously trying to help the school, even in situations pertaining to individuals, obviously pertaining coming from Libya. History, geography, and social studies are being taught in English as well, to reach obviously these students, and to eliminate some language barriers. And also there is a group of Italian students attending the school, a considerable group as well, and there are also work being carried out to integrate the students. Initiatives at a national level consisted of the introduction of ethics. Ethics was introduced some years ago now. Basically, it's introduced in conjunction with religious studies, and it is meant for students who do not want to study religious studies. And I believe that it is becoming quite successful with students, both with foreign students and even with Maltese nationals. There is an induction program which I referred to. It is meant to address the induction between, obviously, when students come and obviously visit Malta until they join the formal schooling and the mainstream schooling. So there is a program, it's called the induction program, and it focuses on two aspects: the emotional well-being of students, and to equip them with the communication skills, which are essential. Basically, there is also another support program for their parents. It is being carried out on a volunteer basis, but there's considerable interest from parents, and also parents are being given skills and also information about schooling and about their basic requirements and needs in the Maltese situation. Maltese as foreign language is also required. Basically, the government has conducted national research. It is currently being finalized. We still do not have the details about the outcomes, but basically it was focusing on the effect on migration and students on the education system and how to try to address the needs and to improve the situation. There's also other research and studies being carried out, and basically we believe that this year we'll have the first results of these studies, and eventually we will need to tackle the situation according to these results. Okay, I'm going to close with a reference from the Migrant International Integration Policy Index, MPEX. Basically, it's what matters most for the outcomes of immigration and non-immigrant pupils is whether the school and the education system fights or reproduces inequality. I think that this is central in our situation. Obviously, all students are at heart. We need to seek ways to educate all students. It's the only way that we can provide a holistic educational process to all. And we believe that this quote is currently what is being carried out in the Maltese situation to try to address the needs of our students. Thanks for your interest. If you have any questions or any comments, or you require any information, you can contact us on those email address and our website provided. Thanks. Enjoy the rest of the conference and stay safe.
Thank you to Marco for delivering this interesting good practice. Indeed, in Malta, they have various challenges, and they're addressing them also on various levels of the whole school approach, including, for example, the linguistic diversity or the religious issues, etc. So I apologize that we ran a little bit beyond the time that we planned, but I hope all of these practices were very useful and interesting for you. And also thank you for your positive comments in the chat. So I would like to conclude this meeting by saying that we heard today how the whole school approach to inclusive education is interlinked with all aspects of inclusive education. So teaching, learning, educational institutional policy overall, school leaders and preparing the school leaders, cooperation among various stakeholders within but also outside of the community, including education trade unions, but also NGOs. Like in Germany, for example, the initiative started from the cooperation with NGOs and then became much wider. Also, facilities and infrastructures that we heard in Israel were also important part of the whole school approach. And of course, the commitment from the school leadership and the shared governance are key components of this approach to inclusive education. And there are many aspects involved, and therefore the issue of providing this training also for teachers, for trainers, for academics, for other education personnel is crucial. And this is what we're trying to do with these webinars as well, to provide various practical tools. So next slide, please. In that sense, I would like to remind you that next two training webinars that will be organized in the same framework will take place on the 12th of April, and it will focus on safe and healthy learning and working environments. And on the 29th of April, we will talk about using digital technologies and media to foster the inclusion. I also invite you, as I started this webinar with, to share with us your union's good practices, but also teacher testimonies for the European and National Action Days on the 17th of May and for the 5th of October, which will coincide with the closing conference of this project. Next slide, please. So I would like, first of all, to thank all the speakers for a very interesting presentation, and also those who are not with us today, but who took time to prepare the recorded presentations. I would also like to thank all the interpreters for their hard work, but also for agreeing to be recorded so that we can present this webinar in 3 languages on the YouTube channels, so that everyone from different linguistic perspectives can listen to it. And I would like, of course, to thank the amazing ETUCE Secretariat team who made this webinar shine today. And before I go further, the previous slide, please. So I would like also to thank all of the participants for your attention, for your support in the chat, and for your support in comments. We will send you all the slides presented today. Also, as I said, the recordings will be on YouTube, and we will also send you an evaluation form, which we kindly ask you to fill in after this webinar. And the next slide. So like I said, for sharing the trade union actions and teacher testimonies, please contact us. We will also share with you the visuals and the communication packages that we prepare for these days. So just before you go, last announcement, could you please all switch on your cameras so we can take a screenshot so we have a nice memory of this webinar. And I'm waiting for my colleagues to let me know that it's done. Put on your best smiles, even if you're outside. I see Peter's outside. And it's all good. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon and an upcoming weekend. And I hope to see you in our future events and in the next webinars. Bye-bye.